You're listening to All Things Video, the podcast dedicated to uncovering the past and charting the future of the online video ecosystem. You're listening to All Things Video. I'm your host, James Creech, and today's guest is Larissa Rydin, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Tiltify. Larissa, welcome to the show.
Hey, James, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get to chat with you today. I thought we'd kick things off by traveling a little bit back in time. So you started your career in marketing for the hospitality industry. I'm curious, what initially attracted you to that career path?
Well, I was a bartender in college and peak of the economy. So I just continued with that trajectory and focused more on the marketing side of the house. But I loved it. It was a lot of fun. Early 2000s, late 1990s. And so it was a blast.
Very good. And then you transitioned into working for nonprofits, including Children's Home Network, St. Jude Children's Hospital, Autism Speaks. What drew you to activism and philanthropy?
Oh, gosh. It's an interesting question. And so I've been thinking a lot about that lately. And I'd always been drawn to making the world a better place, right? But never really considered the nonprofit sector. And I started to think more about that and realized it was connected to me being adopted, oddly enough. So I was adopted at birth, and I knew that my biological mother was very young, 17. And so I always had this desire to make an impact on the world, right? I was lucky to be alive. I knew she made a difficult decision, so to give me a better life. So I wanted to make the best use of it. Didn't know what that meant, didn't know how that came to life, but was working in hospitality marketing, like you said, planned a fundraiser and discovered an organization called the Children's Home, which interestingly works with foster and adopted kids. And so they had a position open. I took that job and never looked back and just realized, this is how I'm going to leave my mark. I spent 15 years in the nonprofit sector, and now I've transitioned to Tiltify, which is not nonprofit. It's a for-profit tech company, but we're still driving social impact and making the world a better place.
That's amazing. So you connected your personal experience, your story, to having an impact, right? Finding a way to share that and give back.
Right, exactly.
Very cool. And how did you make your way to DC?
Did that. I was working for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and working in their Tampa office. And the CEO said, hey, we'd like to move you to a regional office. And at first wanted me to move to Miami, which was not necessarily a place I wanted to move. Born and raised in Tampa, didn't want to move south, and gave me the selection of a couple other regions. And I had just gone to visit DC and had fallen in love with it. And so when, that was on the list, it was a no-brainer, and moved here 7 years ago and have loved every minute of it. Probably would never move back to Florida. So we're super happy in this space.
Awesome. Good to hear. So you most recently served as Vice President of Strategic and Brand Partnerships for the United Way. What were some of the most impactful projects you worked on during your time there?
For sure. So I had an interesting role there where I oversaw a whole bunch of different departments. And really a lot of my job was spent designing social impact strategies for Fortune 500 companies. And the one I am 100% most proud of, this is the easiest question ever, is a program I co-developed with Lyft called Ride United. So it was back in 2018. They were trying to figure out, who do we stand for as a brand? What should we do? And it was pretty natural for them to say, we want to provide transportation to people who need it. And coincidentally, United Way had a program, or still has a program, called 211, which is a 3-digit call number you can call anywhere in the country, and it connects you to community resources. And we were getting a lot of calls from people who needed transportation. So it was a match made in heaven, right? Seems like it was an easy connection, but it was much harder to get there. Looking back, I was like, why didn't we think of this before? But we launched a program with Lyft where they offered free rides to people who called 211 and qualified. Started with medical appointments. So obviously, if you have cancer and you can't get to your chemotherapy treatment, how are you going to get better? Job interviews. How are you going to get a job if you can't get to the interview? And then also did some work, getting to voting booths, and then, later vaccine appointments. So the program really expanded, and we added some new partners right before the pandemic hit, one of those being DoorDash. And we were like, we should test grocery deliveries with this. And so little did we know how much of an impact that would have. So when all of those food banks had lines around the building, we were able to raise our hand and say, I think we have a program that can help get those groceries to the people who need it. So, I mean, that one has impacted millions of people and really kind of changed their lives. So I'm super proud of that one. And I continue to track it. I think they actually just launched a pilot with PetSmart to get pet food to people who need it as well.
That's amazing. Wow. And I think we've observed a trend of more brands wanting to be affiliated with or show their support for these social causes, right? Particularly over the last, call it 18 to 24 months, social justice movements in the US, all these other causes that need time and attention, but also resources, right? And oftentimes a brand can be that partner and bring to bear some significant resources to spread the word or help drive action. So for brands that are interested in participating more or showing their support for these types of causes, what do you recommend?
Oh, sure. It's kind of interesting. So I've been in the cause marketing space for a long time. So for me, if you're a brand and you don't have a social impact strategy that's tying to your marketing initiatives, you should probably fire your CMO. But that's just me because I've been in this space for a while. But I think the interesting thing that's happening right now, and we're definitely seeing this on Tiltify, is kind of two major trends converging. Companies, especially consumer-facing brands, are spending a lot of money around social causes, right? Your brand needs to stand for something. As you know, when you have two comparable products, if one is making the world a better place, consumers are probably going to go with the one that's making the world a better place, right? Brands are also investing a lot of money in influencer marketing, right? So we're seeing a lot more dollars being spent there. So what I love seeing here at Tiltify is those two things converging. So you have major content creators who are launching live streams and doing fundraising on their own accord and raising more money. It's crazy. I mean, they're raising millions and millions of dollars in the matter of minutes, and their community rallies behind them. So my advice to brands is to really look to that space and the intersection of those two as kind of the future, because as a brand, you can sponsor a creator, but it's much more authentic and means a lot more in the community if you are supporting either a cause that the creator cares about, or if you are making donations in this space to causes that align with who you stand for. So that would be my biggest advice. And that's really kind of the trajectory that I see a lot of things going in the corporate space.
Yeah. And how do you make sure, either as someone, as a creator or perhaps as a potential donor, when you evaluate these things, how do you make sure the brand isn't just paying lip service to this cause or just writing a check, right? How does the brand demonstrate that they're really behind this mission?
I think it has to tie with who they stand for. One story that I love, I can't take credit for designing this program, but it's one that I helped to expand. It was UPS. So when a brand is thinking about who they are and what they stand for, we asked UPS the question, what's your superpower? What makes you unique? And their answer was, we are the eyes and the ears of the community. Because their drivers are in every neighborhood, right? They see everything. So when thinking about what cause makes the most sense, Oddly came up with anti-human trafficking, right? So they train their drivers on how to spot the signs of human trafficking and started making investments around that. So to me, that is something that's authentic. You've identified who you are as a company, where you can make a difference. Same with Lyft and transportation, and start to invest your dollars there. And then when you do make investments in those types of initiatives, it is very authentic, right? It's driving who you stand for. It's driving things you care about. So I think it's really important for brands to consider that when they're building their social impact strategy and not just donating dollars everywhere.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it might not always be obvious, right? Like in that UPS example, you might not initially think of, okay, package delivery and stopping human trafficking. And yet they had a unique ability to help solve or attack that problem. So that's really powerful. Let's talk a little bit more about Tiltify, right? For those who aren't familiar, what is it and how did you find out about the company and make your way there?
Sure. So what is it? It's an online fundraising platform. And so a lot of top content creators, brands and charities use it to raise funds on social media platforms. Primarily, the largest ones we see are YouTube, Twitch, TikTok. We actually operate the donation button on TikTok. So if you're fundraising on TikTok, you're fundraising on Tiltify. And then, of course, Instagram and Facebook. And so what makes Tiltify unique in this space is the features and engagement tools we have. So we actually have tools and features that allow the creator or the fundraiser to interact more with their audience in a great way. And so that actually tends to drive more dollars raised 3 times more than our competitors actually. So I was a client of Tiltify when I was at United Way. St. Jude is a longtime client of Tiltify, so I was familiar with them, but not part of that program when I was at St. Jude. And slowly started working more and more with Tiltify and actually had a pretty incredible campaign that we launched with them right at the start of COVID. So it was April. So things were just starting to bubble up. People didn't really know what to do. And I reached out to Tiltify and I said, hey, I'm heading up United Way's global COVID response. What are you seeing on the platform? And Michael, CEO at Tiltify, said, actually, Jacksepticeye just reached out to us and said he wanted to do something. I was like, perfect. So we, United Way, Red Nose Day, and United Nation Foundation collaborated with him on an initiative called Hope from Home. And so it was one of the first kind of virtual fundraisers, with COVID, and we raised $2 million in the course of hours. So when that happened, I learned a lot more about Tiltify and really became a huge fan and saw a lot of opportunity. So of course, when the opportunity arose to come work for Tiltify, I couldn't say no. And so I'm really excited to be in this role now.
That's amazing. Especially if you're a creator and you want to make a difference, right? It's probably, where do you start, right? How do you figure out, okay, how do I accept donations from my fans? How do I do this in an appropriate, responsible way? I imagine there's probably some compliance aspects that they need to navigate. So to have a simple tool where it's, here you go, creators, plug and play, kind of out of the box. We've streamlined this for you. That's fantastic. And then also for causes, right? It sounds like you're doing some of this matchmaking too, where you're saying, the perfect equation is where you bring together a talented creator with, a passion for a cause, a brand, right, that wants to amplify that message or bring some additional assets and value to the table, and then a cause which wants to reach that audience. So it sounds like there's a little bit more than just the technology being brought to bear. It's the human connection and the team layer that helps connect all of these disparate pieces.
Absolutely. And we sit at this interesting intersection where the brands are coming to us saying, this is what we want to activate. Creators are coming to us and saying, this is how we want to activate. And then we're working hand in hand with majority of the charities, definitely all of the big ones. And so we are exactly able to do that. We're able to match make and pull things together and say, great, I think this is a brand that might be interested in supporting XYZ cause. And I think these are creators that we know are looking for something to support.
Amazing. So going beyond nonprofits and charities, do you also see creators fundraising for political candidates?
We do, not on Tiltify. So we actually don't have C4s on our platform, but we're seeing a little bit of that. I think creators are very sensitive. The majority of them, the big ones, are sensitive about political affiliation and how that impacts their community. So they have a tendency to, I think, lean more into humanitarian causes, things of that nature.
Yeah. And how, is the overall environment, social environment, but also these advances in technologies changing the way that we give, right? You've got this kind of growth of online communities and these real close-knit, associations or communities of people that have strong beliefs and might support a cause. Are we seeing, changes in the way that we give as a result of these broader cultural shifts?
I think so. Definitely a changing in where you're going to give and how you're giving, right? So what was interesting about 2020, lots of things changed with 2020. This is just one of many, but we were all forced to isolate, right, and eliminate in-person interactions. So a lot of giving happened at galas, at political fundraisers, at run walks, all of those things. And so charities and even donors had to start looking for other ways to connect to virtual communities. So from the fundraising aspect, charities, all of the ones that I work for, had been, doing digital transformations for years, right? The pandemic actually forced them to accelerate that and really transform. So, mind you, creators, the younger generation, younger donors, they've been donating through social media and virtual platforms for years. The rest of us just now caught up, right? So I think the biggest change and the biggest difference is that we're seeing everyone using these technologies, right? Everyone moving to virtual. I think one of the most interesting things I've heard, as we're moving out of the pandemic and more in-person events are coming back, is with a lot of the health charities. So a lot of them have donors and survivors and people personally impacted who maybe have a compromised immune system or have physical disability where they could never participate in a run walk or attend a gala in person. The virtual aspect now allowed them to participate.
Hmm.
And so I don't see, even when in person comes back, the virtual element going away.
So will it just be hybrid in that case, or do you think that will primarily lean into virtual events, or will we see a return to these physical IRL experiences in the future?
I personally think we'll see in person come back, and there'll be a virtual element to it. Although some things may fundamentally be changed to virtual. There was a lot of success. If you think about those big galas, I've planned many of them in my career, and they cost a fortune. And so if you can do it virtually at a fraction of the cost and still achieve the same results, it's something worth exploring.
Yeah. And, I'm wondering if people have, I don't know what the right word is, but maybe a sensitivity to or a fatigue around some of the fundraising campaigns. It's, to put it in context of what I mean, right? It seems like the incidents of gun violence are higher than normal. We've got this ongoing global health struggle. You've got this series of extreme weather events and other activities being brought on by climate change. Do people just get so inundated with the bad news that it's easy to just throw your hands up in the air and say, I give up? We've all got our fair share of problems. I don't feel equipped to give anymore, or I just gave to that other thing. How am I supposed to give to this next thing? Or are you seeing that digital has a way of bringing these connections together and allowing people to give in new ways or feel closer either to a sense of online community, whereas before maybe we only gave locally, and now there's this broader feeling of interconnectedness because of these online connections that we've established? How are these kind of pushing and pulling forces impacting the way that people give?
I think peer-to-peer fundraising, while it's been around, it's becoming more important in social media. That's what it's all about, right? So people will still give to people. And I think at the end of the day, that's what makes the biggest difference. So if I care about something and I am talking about it and encouraging people to get behind it, my community, the people in my hemisphere and in my circle and in my orbit, are more likely to give to that. I think to some degree, things have shifted a little bit, but for the most part, you're still going to give to causes that your community cares about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we saw that, right? People getting creative, especially during COVID, when museums are shut down, and you're finding these online exhibitions, right? Or the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry in particular, which well from your background, is suffering, and celebrated chefs and others found a way to give back or help their local restaurants. Or some of those restaurants said, "Hey, let's mobilize and create meals for the people who can't afford them right now," right? So it's amazing to see that amidst the global struggle, we've seen it almost unite people in a way, right? Bringing us closer together and having people, forcing them to get creative, right? Like you said, fueling or accelerating this digital transformation that quote unquote may have been in the works, but now it's time to act, right? You have to actually do something about it. I hope that carries through. I hope that even as we hopefully emerge on another side of this pandemic, ultimately, that that spirit and that nature of giving, that attitude continues.
Absolutely. And I think what the pandemic was it was interesting for so many reasons because it affected every single one of us. There's been no cause that I can think of previously that has united and impacted every single person across the world. So whether you were impacted like I lost my dad to COVID back in January, or you were just isolated and not leaving your house. Um, Everyone was impacted in some way, shape, or form.
What's coming next? What does the future hold? If you had to make 3 predictions, say, for the future of cause marketing and online giving, what does it look like?
God, I think more charities will be looking to this space. We saw, I think, pre-pandemic, Tiltify had about 1,000 charities on the platform. We are pushing 4,000 now this year, and continue to get about 20 to 30 new charities reaching out every week, wanting to do that. So I think more charities are going to do that. I think charities are also going to start consolidating their programs, right? And making, like we talked about earlier, having more virtual offerings as part of all of the programs that they do. I think we've also touched on brands. I think more and more brands are going to get into this space. The one thing I'm starting to see an uptick in trend in is employee campaigns. So obviously my background at United Way did a lot of work with employee campaigns, but when the pandemic hit, that was one where people had to get creative. And so we're seeing live stream fundraising being considered a virtual volunteer option, for employees and being counted as such. We're seeing employee resource groups, coming together and doing more virtual online fundraising. So from an employee engagement standpoint, I think that's kind of the missing piece as far as the way companies show up. And then let's see, the third one I would say is probably in the content creator space. So a lot of your content creators are starting to reach the level and influence of your mainstream celebrities. I think of this because I just saw that Under Armour signed one of the esports athletes from FaZe Clan to sponsorship. And so, that's a first, or at least the first I've heard of. So I think we're seeing that space grow as well.
Yeah, you have all these various stakeholders, right? The creator space, brand partnerships, in these employee giving campaigns. I'm curious if you also interact with government, right? How does this cross over to the public sector? One example that's always been really close to my heart is living in Los Angeles, the homeless capital of the United States. I've volunteered at Home Walk every year, which the United Way puts together. And it's an amazing opportunity to do this 5K walk or as a volunteer to support it, to raise so much money to try and transition people into permanent housing. And that's an incredible part of the solution to this massive problem. But it feels like there's also policy impacts, there's a governmental piece of the equation as well. So how do organizations, either based on your experience working directly in nonprofits or now what the work that you do at Tiltify, how does this overlap with government and how do you build bridges and ensure good partnerships together?
I think you have to be working with government. Like advocacy has, as far as the charity side, advocacy has to be part of your effort, even on the brand side and the company side. Homelessness specifically is a very, very complex issue. You can't solve homelessness just by giving someone a house, right? You have to really start to address all of the things that have happened to get to a person to the place where they don't have a home. And so you really have to kind of go back and start to look at those, and everything's not the same. So without having partners in government, without having, the city, the state, the federal government behind it, really helping to shape those policies, you're not going to get very far. So it is really important. And I think both charities and companies have government relations departments. And so one thing we did with United Way is we had a ton of corporate partners. And so we would partner with them on our advocacy efforts. especially if they had strong ties, because we're better together, right? The more voices you can get around a certain issue driving change, the better. So, definitely see a big role for government here, and certainly rallying your employees and your consumers and your donors and all of those folks behind it is really critical as well.
What does the future hold for Tiltify? What are some of the things you're working on now that you're most excited about?
I think we're really thinking a lot about the corporate space. So it ties with kind of my predictions. And you think for us, we're also thinking through where are the other online communities we haven't tapped into. There are a lot of online communities that live beyond Twitch and YouTube and TikTok. So, I'm a sports mom, right? So I have two teenage kids. They both play sports. We fundraise, so is that a space we want to dip into? Is, music. So many, concerts are being live streamed, and fitness, you've got Peloton just announced they're getting into gaming. And, so I think for us, it's just what makes the most sense, and what strategic partners essentially can we align with to build the next iteration of our company.
Very good. Looking forward to that. Now, Larissa, one of my favorite questions to ask everyone who comes on the show, and you're going to have an interesting perspective on this, kind of coming at it from a different angle. But since so much of the audience is entrepreneurs, I like to ask people, if you were going to go out and start a business in this digital media ecosystem today, knowing everything everything you've learned throughout your journey, what would you do?
I think the funny thing about that question is I probably wouldn't. I'm
not
not
an
an
entrepreneurial
entrepreneur.
spirit necessarily.
No, I will run your company for you, but I don't want the responsibility of starting it myself. But I don't know. I don't know what the next thing is. I think that's a hard question to answer, but I do think the charity aspect and the ability to give and how people are giving, and giving folks the ability to make a difference in the world is so important. So no matter what company I would start, it would have a very strong connection to charity and social impact.
Amazing. Yeah. And that's totally a great answer, by the way. Not everyone needs to start a business, but it is interesting to think about the fact that, corporate responsibility is changing. And I think we feel that particularly from kind of the younger generations. So you have now kind of these concepts of a B corporation, or, corporate charters with social good or some sort of corporate responsibility mandates built in. Is that something that, Tiltify espouses, or that you've seen other companies embrace, or that, through your nonprofit work, you're seeing a broader trend towards that kind of baked into the DNA of future corporations?
Absolutely. A lot of the newer tech companies, it's interesting because at United Way, I worked with very traditional, old, long time Fortune 500 companies, and then was working with companies like Airbnb and DoorDash and Lyft, who in their infancy were talking about what is our social impact strategy. And so I think it's really important to build that into who you are. And when you're designing your company, to think through what difference do I want to make in the world? And also, what is my superpower, right? What is the unique positioning that I can bring to the table that I can utilize to make a difference? And so, we think a lot about that at Tiltify as well. And, obviously it's baked into who we are. That's essentially what we do. At the end of the day, we're trying to raise as much money as we can to drive a difference in the world. But it's not as easy to identify that with some other companies. So to anyone listening, absolutely. If you're not thinking about that, you should be thinking about that.
Larissa, where can people find out more about you and more about Tiltify?
Best place to find out more about me is on LinkedIn. So Larissa Rydin on LinkedIn, and then Tiltify is tiltify.com.
Well, thank you. This has been awesome. I encourage everyone out there to go out and check out some of the amazing campaigns that Tiltify is behind, and the work that them and their corporate sponsors and brand partners are doing. It's amazing, right? And it's super powerful to see the impact that these new platforms and new technologies are having, and these voices of these creators, right? These independent creatives can now make a living doing what they love, but they can also take that audience and that power that they've built and put it towards a good cause, right? To raise awareness, do advocacy work, raise money and have that go towards a good cause. And everybody that's certainly something that's paramount right now. So I applaud, the things that you and Tiltify are up to. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. I'm James Creech, and this has been another edition of All Things Video. If you like what you hear, we hope you'll share and subscribe for new episodes. See you next time.